Welcome to the Code Navigators. We're here to help you get a handle on the really complex world of the International Code Council code books.
Yeah, our goal is pretty straightforward. Take these chapters one by one, break down what's inside, how they're put together, and importantly, how you can find what you need quickly.
Exactly. Especially useful if you're studying for those ICC exams or, just using these codes day to day.
And it's probably worth mentioning how we put this together. We use some pretty advanced AI tools to help sort and structure the information.
But, and this is key, it's all overseen, checked, and refined by a human code professional. So it's accurate and practically relevant.
Okay, before we jump in, we absolutely have to cover the legal stuff. Please remember, everything we discuss here is purely for educational purposes.
Right. It's not professional advice, not design recommendations, definitely not legal counsel.
The codes change, they're incredibly detailed, and how they apply always depends on the specific situation, the jurisdiction.
So you always need to consult the official current code book for where you are.
And talk to a qualified professional, an architect, an engineer, a certified building official. Get their eyes on your specific project needs.
Also, just to be clear, we're focusing on the concepts and the structure needed for learning. We're deliberately not quoting or reproducing copyrighted code text itself.
Okay, with that crucial ground covered, let's get into it.
Today, we're tackling what's really the bedrock for almost everything else in building design. The 2021 International Building Code, Chapter 3, Occupancy Classification and Use.
Oh. You really can't overstate how important Chapter 3 is. I mean, look at the user note right at the beginning of the chapter in the code book.
What does it say?
It basically emphasizes that this classification, getting the occupancy right, is the foundation. It drives decisions about, well, everything. Occupant safety, how many exits you need, their size, means of egress.
Fire protection systems too, right? Like sprinklers.
Absolutely. Sprinklers, alarms, even things like what kind of finishes you can put on the walls. If you get the occupancy classification wrong at the start.
Then the whole design could be fundamentally flawed from a safety perspective.
Precisely. The whole thing cascades.
So our mission today is to really map out this classification system, define the main groups, figure out where they live in the code.
And crucially, identify those tricky bits. The exceptions, the places where uses might not be what you first expect. You know, the kind of stuff that often shows up on exams.
Let's get started then. Section 301, the foundation, scope and use designation.
Right, 301.1 general. It lays out the chapter's purpose, controlling the classification of all buildings and structures. And it's all based on how they're used.
So it's basically a risk assessment system.
That's a great way to put it. It defines different levels of hazard. Are there lots of people? Are there volatile materials inside? Things like that. And based on that risk, it dictates the safety measures needed.
For anyone working with the code, this section isn't just introductory fluff, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. It's the starting point. If you're reviewing plans, the very first thing you zero in on is, did they get the occupancy classification right?
Because if they didn't,
everything that follows could be wrong. Like, say you misclassify a busy bar as a general assembly space instead of A2, which is specifically for food and drink.
what happens then?
You might miss key requirements for managing crowds or dealing with a higher fire load from furnishings and maybe cooking. That one mistake impacts height, area calculations, fire resistance ratings, everything.
Okay, then 301.2 talks about use designation. It brings in the idea that buildings often aren't just one single thing.
Exactly. Real-world buildings are complex. You've got your main use, the primary occupancy, but then you often have smaller supporting uses, accessory occupancies.
Like a small office inside a factory.
Precisely. Or a gift shop in a hospital. And the code immediately points you elsewhere to handle this. Chapter 3 gives you the big picture, the main classification.
But then you need to look at Section 508.
Right. Section 508 tells you how to deal with those mixed uses and accessory spaces. When can they be treated separately? When do they need to be fully separated with fire-rated walls?
And it also mentions Chapter 4 and Chapter 5.
Yes. Chapter 4 has special detailed requirements for specific uses, like high-rises or buildings with atriums. And Chapter 5 gives you the actual limits on building height and area, which are directly based on the occupancy class you determined back here in Chapter 3.
So Chapter 3 really is the gateway. You have to go through it correctly to get anywhere else.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's the mandatory starting point.
Okay, moving into Section 302, this is the core mechanism, right? Classification itself.
Yep. 302.1 formally defines Occupancy Classification. It's the official label for the primary purpose of the building or even just a part of it. This label sets the baseline for safety expectations.
Fire safety, structural integrity, how people get out.
Exactly. And it lays down a critical rule for buildings with multiple uses.
The most restrictive rule.
That's the one. If you have, say, a store that's mercantile, Group M attached to a workshop making things factory, F1, the entire structure has to meet the rules for the tougher classification. Unless you properly separate those areas, according to Section 508, usually with fire-rated construction, it's about preventing a hazard in one area from easily spreading to another.
So we have these 10 fundamental groups, the letters A, B, E, F, H, I, M, R, S, U.
Those 10 letters are the language of classification. Knowing them and what they generally represent in terms of risk is absolutely step one for navigating the IBC.
Let's list them again. A is assembly.
B, business.
E, educational.
F, factory and industrial.
H, high hazard. That sounds important.
Oh, it is. We'll spend some time there. I is institutional.
Mercantile.
R, residential.
S, storage.
And U, utility and miscellaneous, the catch-all.
If you're studying, memorizing those, and their basic purpose is key.
It helps to think about the risk level, too. H is obviously top tier for material hazards. I is top tier for occupants who might need help escaping.
Like in hospitals or nursing homes.
Exactly. A is high risk because of large crowds. Then you have groups like B, F, M, S, which are generally lower to moderate risk, but the specifics matter a lot. Understanding that basic hierarchy helps you anticipate the requirements.
Okay, let's start working through them. Group A, assembly, Section 303.
Right. The core idea here is people gathering for some kind of collective activity. Worship, watching a show, eating, amusement.
And because the risk scales with the number of people packed together, Group A gets broken down quite a bit.
That's where the crucial distinctions are made. A1 through A5. It depends on what people are doing and how they're arranged.
So A1, what's that for?
A1 is specifically for viewing performing arts or movies. Think theaters, concert halls, TV studios with an audience.
The key feature is often fixed seating, right? Pointed at a stage or screen.
Generally, yes. People are relatively stationary, focused on a performance.
How does that differ from A2?
A2 shifts the focus entirely to eating and drinking. Restaurants, nightclubs, bars, casinos, gambling areas.
So not passive viewing, but active dining and socializing.
Exactly. And that brings different hazards. Open flame cooking is common. You might have more flammable furnishings like booths, higher occupant density per square foot sometimes, different lighting. It's a distinct risk profile from A1.
Okay, then there's A3, the general assembly category.
Yeah, it's kind of the catch-all for assembly uses that don't fit neatly into the others. So places of worship, churches, synagogues, mosques, libraries, museums, art galleries, lecture halls that aren't part of a school, even funeral parlors. It's a very broad category.
Now, here's a really important point for anyone studying, right? The exceptions.
Absolutely critical. You have to know when something that looks like assembly isn't classified as Group A. Section 303.1.1 is key here.
What does it say?
It says that small assembly uses spaces with an occupant load under 50 people are not Group A. They get classified as whatever the main occupancy is next to them.
So a small conference room in an office building.
If it holds, say, 40 people, it's not A3. It's Group B, business, just like the rest of the office.
And that makes a huge difference in requirements.
Massive. It simplifies everything exiting, fire protection, structural needs. It avoids triggering complex assembly rules for a minor use. It's a really practical exception.
There's also a specific point about places of worship in 303.1.4.
Right. If a church has accessory educational rooms or maybe a small auditorium, and those spaces have an occupant load under 100, they aren't treated as separate occupancies.
So the Sunday school room doesn't automatically trigger mixed occupancy rules.
Exactly. As long as it's accessory to the main worship space and below that 100-person threshold, it's considered part of the primary use.
Okay, finishing up Group A, A4, and A5.
A4 is about indoor spectator seating. Think arenas, ice rinks, swimming pools with spectator areas. The focus is managing big crowds, watching sports or events indoors.
And A5 is the outdoor version.
Pretty much. Bleachers, grandstands, outdoor stadiums, the crowds can be huge, but being outdoors changes the fire and smoke dynamics compared to an enclosed A4 space. Different safety approach needed.
All right, let's shift gears to Group B, business, Section 304.
Group B, found in 304.1. This is your typical office environment. The definition centers on transacting business, providing professional services, keeping records, administrative tasks. sort of white-collar work.
It feels like the default for many buildings, doesn't it?
It often is. If it's not crowded assembly, not making things, not storing hazardous stuff, not residential, it often lands in Group B. Low to moderate risk, primarily daytime use.
What are some key examples?
Banks, clinics for outpatient care, colleges and universities, that's higher ed, K-12 is different. Also, laboratories doing testing or research if they keep hazardous materials below the limits. Motor vehicle showrooms, just the showroom, not the repair shop. Print shops. Training facilities if they're not academic K-12.
You mentioned labs and clinics. Are there special rules there, even if they are Group B?
Good point, yes. While an ambulatory care facility might be B, Section 422 adds specific requirements because patients might be vulnerable during procedures, even if they aren't staying overnight.
In labs.
If a lab handles hazardous materials above the maximum allowable quantities, or MAQs, it jumps out of Group B and into Group H, high hazard. The code constantly makes you check those thresholds. Same for lecture halls within a university if they hold 50 or more. That specific room becomes A3, even if the rest of the building is B.
So Group B is kind of the administrative hub classification, paperwork, consulting, basic research.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
If you're primarily making something, that's F selling things, that's M living there, that's R. Group B is for the business transactions and services.
Okay, let's move to E and F education and factory industrial. Sections 305 and 306.
Section 305 covers Group E, educational, and the definition is super specific, used through the 12th grade only.
So elementary, middle, high schools, but not colleges.
Correct. Once you hit higher education, it's just to Group B, which has less stringent requirements, reflecting older, more capable occupants.
What's the tricky part in Group E? Usually daycare, right?
Always daycare. Section 305.2 spells it out. A daycare is Group E only if it's for kids 2.5 years old or older, and they're there for less than 24 hours a day.
Why 2.5? That seems very specific.
It's about assumed capability for self-preservation. The code figures that by 2.5, a child generally has enough mobility and understanding to respond to instructions and try to get out in an emergency.
And if they're younger?
If the kids are younger than that, they need more help.
Yeah.
The dependence triggers tougher requirements. Depending on the number of kids, it might push the classification into Group I4, institutional daycare, or keep it as a strictly regulated R3 residential.
Ah, the small number exceptions.
Okay.
Sections 305.2.2 and 305.2.3.
Exactly. If you have 5 or fewer kids and they're 2.5 years or older, it's classified as R3, basically treated like a home.
And if they're under 2.5 but still 5 or fewer?
Also R3, but it specifically references the International Residential Code, the IRC, for how that home needs to be set up. Once you go over that 5-child limit, or if the kids are younger and need more care, the classification shifts to E or I4, and the safety rules get much stricter.
Makes sense. Okay, Group F, factory industrial, Section 306.
This covers making things fabrication, manufacturing, processing, unless the materials involved are hazardous enough to make a Group H.
Like assembly and storage, it's split by hazard level, F1 and F2.
Correct. F1 is moderate hazard industrial. These places have a noticeable but manageable fire risk. Think aircraft assembly plants, not repair, that's S1, furniture factories, appliance manufacturing, woodworking shops, maybe wood distillation, often needs dust control, sprinklers.
And F2?
F2 is low hazard industrial. The processes or materials involved are less likely to cause a major fire, making beverages under 16% alcohol, brick or masonry plants, glass manufacturing, metal fabrication, gypsum board production. The materials themselves aren't very combustible.
Okay, now for the big one. Group H, high hazard, Section 307. You said this is a hot spot for exams.
Absolutely. If you're prepping for an ICC test, you have to know Group H inside and out. It's easily the most technical classification, and getting it wrong has huge consequences for a building's design.
So what's the core definition?
The absolute key is this. Group H applies when you're handling, storing, or processing materials that pose a physical or health hazard.
Okay.
In quantities greater than the maximum allowable quantities, the MAQs, permitted in designated control areas. Those MAQs are defined over in Section 414.
So it's all about quantity thresholds. Exceed the limit, and boom, you're Group H.
Exactly. The second you go over that MAQ for a specific material in a control area, the classification flips to H. And that triggers a whole suite of very strict rules. Stronger separation from other areas, special ventilation, often explosion control, enhanced fire suppression. It's a major design driver.
And Group H itself is broken down further
Correct.
into H1 through H5.
Yes, 5 crucial subgroups based on the type of hazard.
Okay, what's H1?
H1 is for detonation hazards. Think things that can explode almost instantly. high explosives, unstable materials that can decompose violently, blasting agents. The main risk is catastrophic failure of the building itself.
Then H2.
H2 covers deflagration or accelerated burning. This is where you find flammable gases, very flammable liquids and solids, pyrophoric materials, stuff that ignites just on contact with air. The danger is incredibly fast fire spread and pressure buildup, like a flash fire.
What about H3?
H3 is for materials that support combustion or pose other physical hazards. Less volatile flammable liquids, like diesel fuel maybe. Strong oxidizers classified as class 3 or 4, which feed oxygen to a fire. Materials that react dangerously with water. These make fires much hotter and longer lasting.
And H4 moves away from fire hazards.
Right. H4 is purely about health hazards. Corrosives, highly toxic substances, toxic materials. Even if they don't burn easily, releasing them in an emergency is a major life safety threat to people inside and to first responders.
Lastly, H5. That sounds very specific.
It is. H5 is exclusively for semiconductor fabrication plants and similar high-tech research labs. They use incredibly hazardous materials, but under very specific, highly controlled conditions with specialized ventilation and safety systems detailed in Section 415.11. It warrants its own subgroup.
Okay, let's talk strategy for the exams, especially those tables. Table 307.111 for physical hazards, 307.11 for health hazards. How should someone approach these?
First step, always. When you see hazardous materials mentioned in a problem, you need to figure out how they're being used. The tables are typically split into 3 main columns or variations of them.
Which are?
Is it storage? Is it being used in closed systems? Or is it being used in open systems? Your answer determines which MAQ limit applies.
Can you give an example of why that difference matters so much, closed versus open systems?
Sure. Let's take highly toxic solids from Table 307.12. For basic storage, you might be allowed, say, 500 pounds per control area. If you're using that same toxic solid in a closed system like inside sealed pipes or a reaction vessel where it's contained, the limit might be similar, maybe slightly higher, because the risk of exposure is lower.
But if it's an open system...
Now the risk shoots way up. An open system means you're maybe weighing out powders on a bench, even in a fume hood, or mixing chemicals in an open tank. The potential for accidental release, spills, inhalation is much higher.
So the allowable quantity drop.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
In that highly toxic solid example, the MAQ for open-use systems might plummet to something like 125 pounds, a huge reduction just based on how you're handling it.
Wow, a 75% cut just based on handling method. That really shows the detail here.
It does. And don't forget the units. Solids are usually in pounds, liquids in gallons, but gases are measured in cubic feet at NTP.
NTP, normal temperature and pressure.
Exactly. That's 70 degrees Fahrenheit and standard atmospheric pressure. You need that standard because gas volume changes a lot with temperature and pressure. Using NTP makes sure everyone's calculating the quantity the same way.
And even within a hazard type like oxidizers, there are classes.
Right. Oxidizers feed oxygen to fires. They're ranked Class 1, least hazardous, up to Class 4, most hazardous. You can store a lot more Class 1 or 2 oxidizer before hitting Group H limits compared to a Class 4, where even a small amount might trigger the H classification.
Are there any major exemptions to watch out for in Section 307?
Yes, Section 307.1.1 has some important ones. It clarifies that just because a place handles some combustibles doesn't automatically make it H. For example, a big hardware store or paint store selling flammable liquids.
They aren't automatically Group H.
Not necessarily. If they keep the quantities within the limits allowed for mercantile or storage S occupancies, they can stay in those classifications. It's a practical balance, preventing everyday retail from being saddled with extreme H group requirements.
Okay, that's a lot to digest for Group H. Let's move to the next block. I, M, and R, institutional, mercantile, residential, sections 308, 309, 310.
Starting with Group I, institutional, in Section 308. The defining characteristic here is occupants who depend on others for care or supervision. This means the life safety rules are among the strictest in the code.
And the differences between the I groups depend on the occupant's ability to get out on their own.
Exactly. It's all about capability for self-preservation.
So I1.
I1 is custodial care. It applies to facilities with 16 or more people who need personal care but are considered capable of responding to an emergency and getting out without physical help from staff.
Yeah.
Think larger group homes, maybe some assisted living facilities where residents are mobile but might need guidance.
Then I2 sounds more serious.
It is. I2 is for medical care, where occupants are generally incapable of saving themselves due to age, illness, or medical condition. This is your hospitals, nursing homes, detoxification centers.
So the building itself has to provide more protection.
Much more. Because occupants might be bedridden, sedated, or impaired, I-2 facilities require robust passive protection, like fire barriers, smoke compartments, and active systems like full sprinkler coverage, to buy time for staff to evacuate patients.
Okay, I3 is different again. Restrained occupancy.
Right. This isn't about medical care, it's about security. Jails, prisons, correctional centers, detention facilities, the primary function involves restraint.
How does the code handle safety there? They can't just run out.
The safety strategy shifts. Section 308.4 outlines different conditions based on how much freedom occupants have within the secure perimeter and how egress is managed. It focuses on things like smoke compartments to protect people in place and controlled staff-operated release mechanisms rather than immediate self-evacuation.
And I4 brings us back to daycare.
Yes, I4 daycare. This covers facilities caring for 5 or more people for less than 24 hours a day, where those people need supervision. Crucially, this usually applies to children under 2.5 years old or adults who are incapable of self-preservation and need custodial care during the day.
So that age threshold for kids comes up again.
It's a key differentiator between E-educational and I-4 institutional daycare.
Got it. Moving to Group M, mercantile, Section 309. This seems straightforward selling stuff.
Pretty much. Group M is for the display and sale of merchandise. Department stores, supermarkets, drugstores, retail shops, even gas stations fall under M.
What's the main risk concern in M?
Usually 2 things. The fuel load from all the goods being sold, clothes, packaging, plastics, sometimes flammable liquids, and potentially large numbers of people, often unfamiliar with the layout.
And like other groups, there is a check for hazardous materials.
Always. Section 309.2 points you back to the hazardous material limits, specifically Table 414.2.54. For M occupancies. If a store starts storing or displaying hazardous materials above those specific M limits, that area might need to be classified as S, storage, or even H, high hazard, requiring separation.
Okay, last in this block. Group R, residential, Section 310, living and sleeping.
Right. And the distinctions here depend mainly on how long people stay and how many separate living units there are.
R1 is transient, like hotels.
Exactly. R1 is for occupants who generally stay 30 days or less. Hotels, motels, transient boarding houses, if they have more than 10 occupants. Because people are unfamiliar with the building, R1 has stricter rules for things like exit signs, fire alarms, and sometimes sprinklers.
R2 is more permanent.
Yes, R2 is for permanent residences where there are more than 2 dwelling units. So apartment buildings, condo buildings, dormitories, monasteries, convents. People live here long term.
And R3 is the typical house.
R3 covers buildings with just 1 or 2 dwelling units, your standard single-family home or duplex. It also covers some smaller congregate living situations, like small boarding houses, up to 10 occupants, or those small group care facilities, up to 5 occupants, as we discussed under E&I, and the small daycares we mentioned earlier.
Now, the line between R3 and R4 seems really fine. R4 is residential care assisted living.
It is a very fine line, and crucial to get right. R4 is specifically for facilities housing between 5 and 16 occupants who need personal care. They're receiving custodial care or assisted living services.
What determines if it's R4 versus, say, I1?
It's about the number of occupants.
Yeah.
516 for R4, and their specific capabilities, defined in Section 310.5.1. There are 2 conditions.
Condition 1 and Condition 2.
Right. Condition 1 is where the residents need some help, but they are fundamentally capable of recognizing an emergency and starting to evacuate on their own. Condition 2 is where residents might need limited verbal cues or some physical assistance from staff to actually complete the evacuation.
That slight difference starting evacuation versus needing help to finish it changes the requirements.
Significantly. Condition 2 often triggers higher requirements for things like fire resistance ratings, maybe smoke compartments, wider egress paths, because you have to account for the extra time and staff effort needed to get everyone out safely. It really highlights how occupant capability drives the code.
Okay, nearly there. Let's wrap up with the last 2. S for storage and U for utility, Sections 311 and 312.
Group S, storage, in Section 311. Like Group F, it's split based on hazard.
S1 is moderate hazard storage.
Correct. This is for storing materials that pose a decent fire risk but aren't hazardous enough to be Group H. Think warehouses storing aerosol products within limits, wood, furniture, paper products, grains in silos. These usually need good fire separation and often sprinklers because the fuel load can be very high.
Any specific callouts for S1?
Yes, a really common one. Motor vehicle repair garages are typically classified as S1. This reflects the hazards associated with flammable liquids like oil and gasoline, tires, and repair processes.
And S2, low hazard storage.
S2 is for storing materials that are basically non-combustible or have very little hazard. Cement in bags, glass, metal products, gypsum board, maybe empty cans. Low risk of fire starting or spreading.
What about parking garages? Where do they fit?
Public parking garages generally fall under S2. While cars contain fuel, the risk of ignition in a stationary parked vehicle is considered low enough for S2. However, Section 406 has a lot of specific additional requirements for garages regarding ventilation, separation, height and area limits, vehicle barriers, etc. So it's S2 plus Chapter 4 rules.
Finally, Group U, utility and miscellaneous. Section 312, the catch-all.
That's exactly what it is. It's for buildings and structures that are accessory to a main occupancy and don't fit neatly anywhere else. The hazard level is considered relatively low, incidental to the main use.
What kind of things end up in U?
Very common structures, actually. Agricultural buildings, like barns and sheds, unless they have high human occupancy. Carports, fences over 7 feet tall. Private garages attached to a house, which is R3. Storage tanks, communication towers, things that aren't typically occupied by people for long periods.
What about greenhouses?
Good question. Section 312.1.1 says greenhouses are Group U unless they're used for other purposes.
Meaning?
If the greenhouse includes a retail shop selling plants to the public, that shop portion becomes M, mercantile. If they build a large attached hall for flower shows or public events, that hall becomes A3, assembly. The use always dictates the classification, even within a structure that seems like a simple Group U building.
Okay, we've made it through A to U. That was quite a tour.
It really covers the fundamental structure. What we've just walked through is essentially the master key to unlocking the rest of the IBC.
So the big takeaway is, get Chapter 3 right first. Everything else, structure, fire ratings, exits, hinges on that initial occupancy classification.
Absolutely. For exam takers, you just can't pass without being proficient here. You need to classify A through U confidently, know the nuances in R and I, and especially be able to navigate the details of Group H and those MAQ tables. Master this chapter and you have the roadmap for the whole code.
Let me leave you, our listener, with a final thought, something that really shows the weight of these decisions in Chapter 3.
Come on.
Think about that fine line between R3 residential and I4 institutional daycare. How adding just one child under 2.5 years old or going from 5 to 6 occupants needing care can fundamentally transform the building's required safety features.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
That small change in who is inside, or how many, completely alters the code's demands. Fire protection, wall ratings, exit widths, everything changes. It goes from standard home requirements to much stricter institutional rules. It really underscores how Chapter 3 is built around protecting the specific occupants and managing the specific risks of how a building is used.
Well said. It shows how tightly those risk thresholds are drawn, and why getting the classification right is absolutely paramount for life safety.
If this breakdown was helpful for your work or your studies, you can help us keep creating more content like this. Check out the Patreon link in the show description. Your support helps us continue these analyses of the code chapters.
Thanks for joining us on the Code Navigators. We'll catch you next time as we navigate another part of the code.